My next guest in, Lerner Maclay, the minister of the First Unitarian Church in Providence. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Big day today. The religious community and the community at large has a big announcement about an event taking place this weekend as we look at Mother's Day and approaching guns in the community, turning guns into plowshares.
Right.
So talk with us about how religious folks came together to address this issue, and this is your brainchild.
It is. But it didn't start with me. It's something that's been growing and moving slowly across the country in different faith communities and faith communities of all different faiths and religions. So I heard about it happening at a congregation that I have a lot of respect for, and I thought we should do this at First Unitarian here in Providence. But then I thought if we do it only in my church, it will get some notoriety, but it won't really make a difference. So I thought what I really need to do is see if we can bring in other congregations and other faiths who care about this also, and make it clear that this is a faith issue and an interfaith issue, and not just something one congregation cares about. So I reached out first to Rabbi Howard Voss Altman over at Temple Bethel, and he said yes right away. He was really enthusiastic and he was ready to commit. And then we pulled together a group of people, clergy from many different faiths, and some folks who were working on gun control already here in Rhode Island. And we met together, and a bunch of clergy again said yes right away. It was not a hard sell. I think that people care a lot about this issue, and I think people were ready for an opportunity to do it. I think that the fact that so many legislators have been responding to various episodes of gun violence with thoughts and prayers made a lot of us in the religious community think, well, if the legislators are just going to offer thoughts and prayers, maybe it's time for us to get on the legislative side of things.
Because you're in the business of the prayer side. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of it. It's literally taking guns and turning them into art.
Yeah. It is. So what we did was we put out a call for people who wanted to contribute to this effort. Well, actually, let me back it up and say that when I first preached about this issue at my own congregation, First Unitarian here in Providence, there was a huge groundswell of support, and unsolicited, someone who was a gun owner in the congregation said that he would like to donate a sporting shotgun that he uses, a beautiful gun, to this cause. And I should back up for just a moment and say this is not about getting rid of all guns. This is not about getting rid of the Second Amendment. This is very clearly focused on three issues that are coming up with the legislator this year, which is the No Guns in Schools Act, the assault weapons ban, and the bump stock ban. So I have used hunting rifles before in training my dogs, which are hunting dogs. I have friends and relatives who hunt and shoot for sport, people who keep guns for personal safety. This is not what that's about. Mm-hmm. This is very clearly focused on the gun safety legislation that's a much bigger picture thing. So, so when I preached about this, one of my congregants came forward immediately and said he wanted to donate a firearm to this cause. And then we thought, oh, how many people in our own communities want to support this? So we started to put out the word. We had another gun come in from inside of our congregation. We've also had people outside of any faith express commitment in this, and there's a really moving story that that has really made us feel the privilege and power of what we're doing here. There's somebody in the city who donated a handgun that was used a long time ago to intimidate her by a family member. And the gun ended up coming into her possession, and she kept it all this time because she never wanted it to be used against a person ever again, and was thinking, what can I do with this gun that's responsible? And she's not involved in any congregation, but she saw a flyer about what we were doing and said, this is what I need to do because this will work to keep other people safe. She is, again, a gun owner. This is about safe and responsible gun control. So she took this particular handgun and brought it in and donated it. It was a very, very powerful thing to be on the receiving end of that firearm. So this is speaking to lots of people within faith communities and beyond faith communities here in Rhode Island. It's been really exciting to see that kind of energy. We're taking the guns in various congregations. So my own, the Temple Bethel is going to be doing it with a handgun, well, a firearm, in their worship service this coming Friday night. Central Congregational Church and also First Baptist Church will each have a firearm in their Sunday worship services, along with us, in our Sunday morning worship services. We're taking the firearms. We gave them to the Providence Police, who I have to say have been super, super supportive of this effort.
Just gonna bring you a little bit closer over here.
Sure.
Okay.
They come and talk to us and said, we don't want people to be bringing guns to churches and schools and making things unsafe for the people there and difficult for us if we're ever called into an emergency situation.
Yep.
And there's lots of armed people around. That's not what they want. So they've been extremely supportive of this. They took the guns that came in, disabled and disarmed them completely, made them impossible to use ever again. And now they're returning them to us, and we will be using those firearms that came in and were disabled by the police in the worship services, dedicating them in our worship services to the cause of peace, and then giving them to artists at the steel yard who are going to turn them from guns into gardening tools, which is sort of the modern day swords into plowshares, right? Which comes from Isaiah in the Bible, chapter 2, verse 4, where it talks about turning swords into plowshares. This is the modern day guns into gardening tools version of that.
So can you imagine maybe an event in the coming weeks or months that you see the fruits of the labor of the steelyard artist to say, wow, you made that from a gun?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. We do anticipate that. There's a number of artists at the Steelyard who are going to be working on this with us, and a number of our congregations, including my own, First Unitarian, are very interested in getting the art back, the gardening tool, and then using it on our grounds. So it is symbolic, but it's also real. And we want to have that full cycle completed, so that we can really be part of the end of the symbolism and the revisioning of that into something that gives life, right? Gardening tools it's not just about art, it's about giving life and focusing on that instead of gun culture.
And speaking of giving life, there's no doubt this was done in conjunction with Mother's Day. And just talking about the impact that you've seen, religious communities have seen of gun violence and its devastating impact on families here and around the country.
Unquestionably. We have our worship service, for example, is going to be involving a lot of people from our congregation. So we have youth who are going through active shooter drills in schools that are going to be participating in our service. We also have someone who's worked on a gun violence quilt that was made from the clothes and pajamas of children in Providence who were killed by gun violence. And she's one of the people who actually took those clothes. And imagine what that experience is like, of taking these t-shirts and footed jammies of kids who have been shot to death. And the families gave them directly into her hands. She met the families of these kids, and it was one of the most profound experiences of her life. There was a quilt that was made of them that is featured every year at my congregation in a vigil about gun violence. And families of the kids come, and teachers of the kids come. Everybody knows this already. I hardly need to say that surely one of the worst experiences anybody can have in life is to lose your child, and to lose them to gun violence of all things. And the choices that are involved in gun violence is unimaginably horrible. So yes, Mother's Day is an intentional choice, both because it lifts up the loss to parents and families of kids, which is happening so much in our country, and also because when it was originally founded, the vision was that it was supposed to be a holiday dedicated to peace and disarmament. Now, this was back in a day when people weren't using military weaponry on each other in private life. So really it was about war and trying to move from the violence of war to peace. But nowadays, when we're using the weapons of war on our streets and in our homes and our churches and our schools, we've really seen a whole new connection between the original intent of Mother's Day and the applications for it now in the modern world.
And you talk about, again, legislators talking about thoughts and prayers, turning the prayers and the religious community into action. How much do you see, and you see it a lot, the religious community, and then, this is at the congregations itself with the guns, but, do you consider yourself an advocate, a lobbyist, really pushing for the legislature for these goals?
I don't feel like a lobbyist. I feel like a person who believes that faith has to be manifest in the world, right? There's always this idea about faith and deeds. Is it enough to believe something, or do you actually have to make it real? And do you have to live what you believe? And in my faith, and in many faiths, certainly not only mine, we come down on the side of, yeah, you got to live what you believe. If we merely believe and we don't do what we can to actually make that belief real and impactful and saving, it's not enough. So for me, that's the important thing, is it doesn't feel like being a lobbyist, it feels like being a minister.
Well, I appreciate your coming in to tell folks about what's taking place at congregations around the city. We'll provide links to this as well. But then coming up this weekend, guns into Plowshares. Again, the religious community taking an active role here in Rhode Island. Liz, I appreciate your taking the time to come in today.
Thanks so much.
I'll let you go around the corner.
Okay,
thank you. Okay. Liz Lerner Maclay, minister of the First Unitarian Church in Providence, coming in. They kicked off the announcement today, this weekend. Congregations around the city and state will be focusing this Mother's Day weekend on both looking at gun safety and what's before the legislature, but specifically to have folks bring in, as she said, some firearms, but as she mentioned, as shotguns. This is, she said, not against the Second Amendment in any way, shape, or form, but something that the congregation, and as she mentioned, folks not even in the religious community taking action. So I appreciate Liz taking the time to come here into the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Appreciate your tuning in for the 3 o'clock show. 4 o'clock will be Josh Fenton with Business Monday, Gary the Moneyman Sass at more. So we'll see you back here in the studio at 4. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.